Hello, and welcome to today's webinar. My name is Adam Golov, Marketing and Communications Manager at Data Conversion Laboratory, and I'll be your moderator today. Before we get started, I want to let you know we will allow time at the end of the webinar for questions and answers. So please write your questions in the chat area as they come to mind. If we don't have time to answer them all, we will make them available on our website. For those of you who are not familiar with DCL, we convert and organize content to create electronic documents, populate databases, publish on the web, and basically get it ready for tomorrow's technology. DCL services help you refine your document conversion strategy, identify document redundancy, extract metadata, and transform legacy and future documents for real needs, today and in the future. Today we are thrilled to introduce Dr. Kara Warburton, a recognized expert in content management with a focus on terminology and lexical resources. She holds a PhD in managing terminology for commercial enterprises and has over 30 years experience in content management. Through her company Termologic, she has provided support and training in content management to dozens of global companies and organizations. She actively contributes to the development standards for managing content through organizations such as ISO, LISA, Terminorgs, the Object Management Group, the Globalization and Localization Association, and the Organization for the Advancement of Structured Information Standards, OASIS. Without further ado, welcome, Kara.
Okay, well, thank you, Adam, for that great introduction. Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for taking the time to join this webinar. I know you're all pretty busy people, so let's get started. Well, I'm a terminologist, which is basically someone who manages a form of microcontent known as terminology. And today I'll present some views about microcontent that are influenced by linguistics, which is the science of language. I think this kind of academic view is actually beneficial for managing content in a business or a commercial environment. So let's start with, okay, sorry, my screen isn't advancing, so let me escape out of full screen mode. Okay, here we go. Sorry about that. Okay, back. Okay, here we go. Let's start with some definitions of content management. Content management is the administration of digital content throughout its life cycle, from creation to permanent storage or deletion. Global content management is additionally concerned with translation and localization. So, what are the types of activities involved in content management? Here we see a breakdown of those activities. First, we create the content, then it's edited for clarity and accuracy according to rules of grammar and style, which are often found in a corporate style guide. There are also standards and best practices for creating certain types of business content, which are produced by organizations such as the International Organization for Standard, or ISO. Today, content is digital. So in order to enhance our ability to manage the content and optimize it for search, we need to add metadata to describe the content. Of course, this means that the content is probably encoded in XML formats such as DITA or Darwin Information Typing Architecture, which is an OASIS standard XML format for commercial documentation. If we are a global organization, then the content needs to be translated and localized to the target market. But this means that the original content must be internationalized so that it can be translated more easily. To translate the content, we use other XML formats such as XLIF and TMX, or Translation Memory Exchange. Then the content can be published and made available to our target audience in various delivery media. To be efficient, we need to store the content and reuse it again, possibly with some updates to reflect some changes. So then we need a version control system to manage those updates. Many people are involved in these various tasks, and they often use tools such as controlled authoring software and translation memory systems. And the whole process can be managed with the help of a content management software. But in order for me to introduce the notion of microcontent in the wider context of content management, I need you to see that content has increasing levels of granularity, just like nesting Russian dolls become smaller and smaller. So the largest level of content is the entire collection relating to a core asset, such as a product or a service. So an information portal, a product information portal, would be a good example of this large form of content. The next level would be a document, a web page, or a file within that collection. Here I have an example of a web page from Autodesk about a feature of their design software called Notes and Labels. You can see in the small print that this information already has some level of reuse because it applies to the different products listed: AutoCAD 2017, AutoCAD Architecture, Civil 3D, Electrical, and so forth. Okay. So then we can go further into smaller and smaller pieces of content. A section within a web page, a paragraph within a section, and a sentence within a paragraph. This slide shows a sentence, but within the sentence itself are even smaller bits of content that correspond to concepts, such as what we have here: command window, annotation panel, and multi-line text. It's worth noting here that the sentence level is traditionally viewed as the smallest level of content that can be reused, or repurposed as I like to call it. Translation memory systems, for example, allow translated sentences to be reused for repetitive content in different documents. One of the key messages of this presentation, however, is that these smaller bits below the sentence level are in fact reusable. So what is microcontent? Let's look at some possible definitions. Okay, so according to Wikipedia, a usability expert named Jakob Nielsen was the first to use the word microcontent in 1998. Although actually I find that a bit hard to believe. He defines it anyways as short content, like headlines, that can be understood out of context. So a sentence would be considered then a form of microcontent because it can be understood out of context. Most of them can anyways. Then in 2002, a guy named Anil Dash, who's simply known as the blogger, extended the notion to any piece of content that conveys one primary idea or concept. And he gives as examples weather forecasts, instant messages, and article abstracts. Well, I don't know about you, but for me, these examples contain multiple concepts. A weather forecast will include information about temperature, wind, rain, sun, and so forth. Each of those is also a concept. And an article abstract certainly contains more than one concept. I guess it all depends on how you define a concept. Well, for me, those definitions aren't faithful to the true meaning of the word micro. Micro is a word of Greek origin meaning extremely small, minute in size. The examples that they give simply aren't micro enough. I see these definitions as being kind of ostensible. They're not really based on empirical observation. They seem to be driven by popular culture, how we deliver content through social media, on smartphones and the like. There is, in fact, a long tradition of studying microcontent in language sciences such as lexicology and linguistics. That's why I find it hard to believe that Mr. Nielsen was the first to use this word, and I think, in fact, I'll check the scholarly literature and maybe correct the Wikipedia article myself if I find an earlier reference. In any case, scholars in these language sciences view microcontent as content that is univocal. That is, content that has one meaning. So let me explain this perspective. Text that corresponds to a concept is microcontent. Usually it is just a single word or a few words. We saw the examples of command window and annotation panel. It's at this level, the level of concepts, that content is translated. Contrary to popular belief, translators do not translate words. They do not translate sentences, and they do not translate paragraphs. they translate concepts. They find the best way to express in their language the same concept. That's why viewing micro-content as content corresponding to a concept and managing content at this micro level is so essential for good translation. So these units of micro-content are often called terms. Terms express key concepts in an organization. This slide here shows a word cloud from a company that produces antivirus and security software for mobile devices. Terms like malware, mobile security, and mobile threat represent significant concepts for this company. You can well imagine that these terms are repeated over and over again in many different documents within the company. Websites, videos, and other types of content, for example. Obviously, it's very important to use these terms consistently, to avoid using alternate expressions for the same concept, and to find appropriate equivalents in other languages and also use them consistently. Sometimes a phrase or a slogan can become a fixed piece of content that has significant marketing value. Here on this slide, I'm showing some slogans that I found on the websites of 5 different companies. The companies are listed on the right. The same slogan is repeated throughout the company's content and becomes part of the company's core identity, its brand. At this level, the content cannot be further dissected into smaller parts, and it becomes like a single concept. For example, we would not normally think of manufacturing as being smart. Smartness is a function of the human brain, not a mechanical process. This unusual and unexpected use of language gives the slogan more punch and increases its retention capacity in our minds. We tend to remember slogans like this, so I see these kinds of special fixed phrases as a kind of micro-content. Now, getting back to terms, terms can also be very important tools for improving the ability of people to find the content, such as during a Google search. These types of terms are called search keywords, and managing their use is called search engine optimization, or SEO. On this slide, I show a good search keyword for the same 5 companies that we saw just on the previous slide. When you search for gourmet coffee on the internet, Starbucks wants to rank high in the search results. If Starbucks manages the use of this term on its web pages according to SEO best practices, then indeed it will. And finally, visuals can also convey concepts, and therefore they can be viewed as a kind of micro-content. Selecting appropriate visuals and using them consistently and in the right places is obviously very important. But certain controls have to be put into place to manage this properly. You can't imagine, for example, how to manage these kinds of things in a company's style guide. You could try, but I don't think it would be very effective. Okay, so if you are proactive in identifying your key terms, in using them consistently, in translating them, and so forth, then you're building better content from the ground up. It's a bottom-up content management strategy. This minimizes problems of a top-down approach, where poor word choices and other problems at the elementary level of content are not discovered until very late in the content management cycle, if at all, at which time they are often very widespread and more costly to fix. And there are even standards, for example, from ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, that cover managing this type of content. Content that is more consistent at the micro level is more repurposable. You can reuse or recycle more of your content, such as in translation memories, when it is standardized, if you will, at an elementary level. This actually saves money in production costs. And when you select effective search words for your content, search keywords, and you implement them properly, your content will be easier to find and will rank higher in internet search. And clear, consistent messaging is simply better. It's more engaging, it's more impactful. People get your message quickly and easily in all languages when you use clear, consistent wording. Okay, now let's take a look then at this micro-content. From a technical standpoint, I think that micro-content has three pieces of do not. Micro-content is univocal, it's discrete, and it's infinitely reusable. Other forms of content are reusable too, but not infinitely, or as infinitely. Okay, so let me say a few words about each of these properties. Okay, as mentioned earlier, univocal means that the content has a single meaning. For example, the concept of a hybrid cloud can be clearly defined and even illustrated visually. But what about those words that have more than one meaning? I can hear someone asking that question. For example, the word cloud itself refers figuratively to the internet and concretely to the actual clouds in the sky. Two completely different meanings, even though it's the same word. This property of a word having multiple meanings is called polysemy. Polysemy is very common in languages like English. So I'm not saying, therefore, that words are univocal. No. What I'm saying is that microcontent is small pieces of text that are based on a single meaning. So the word cloud, when referring to the internet, is one instance of microcontent. And the word cloud, referring to those things in the sky, is another instance of microcontent. We are, in this case, actually talking about two different terms which happen to have the same surface form, C-L-O-U-D. In any case, microcontent is univocal, whereas we can't say this about sentences, paragraphs, or documents. And actually, this property of being univocal is one of the reasons why it can actually be managed in a special way. The next property is discreteness. The word discrete is often associated with data. Discrete data is minimalist. That means it can't really be further subdivided. It has stable properties, and it can be managed as self-contained units. Microcontent also has these properties. This means that microcontent can be managed in a database in the same way that numerical data can. So perhaps an example can help illustrate the nature of microcontent and its repurposing potential. Here we have a website describing the concept of gamification. It's a new term for me anyways. The term gamification is repeated often, and it even appears in the figure. The word also forms longer terms like gamification service, gamification concept, and gamification rule. I've highlighted some of them in yellow here. Obviously, it makes sense to use these terms consistently and to find appropriate, logical, and consistent translations in other languages. So we can't manage this the way it appears here on the screen with the word just sort of buried in text, buried in prose. We have to pull it out. So we have to take this word out of its physical location, buried in the text, out of the prose, and treat it as a separate entity. And you need to make this information available to your employees as a resource in the tools that they use. This makes it possible to enforce consistency and good translations. As I said a moment ago, microcontent can be managed in a database, just like other forms of discrete digital content. But you need a specially designed database management system, and you need to connect this database to production tools used for authoring, controlled authoring tools, for example, and tools used for translation, such as computer-assisted translation tools. And if you use tools for search engine optimization, you need to connect it to those tools. File management, version control, quite a few tools used in the end-to-end content management process would need to be connected to this special database. And everyone involved in developing or managing content needs to have information at their fingertips about word usage, branding, search keywords, and so forth. In this slide, I show a very basic system architecture. On the left, you have a database containing microcontent, multilingual microcontent, associated metadata, and other relevant information in these different languages. This database is managed by using a database management system shown in the middle that is specially designed for microcontent. Although microcontent has properties similar to data, it's still not data. So you can't just take, a DBMS designed for digital numerical management and transfer it over to linguistic microcontent. You need some additional functions and features that might not be available. So we require a unique, the system we would adopt would have a unique data model and also some tooling. And the person managing it has to have an appropriate linguistic background in addition to being tech savvy. On the right, you have the various delivery media. People should be able to access the information where and when they need it, pretty much effortlessly. If your technical writers or your marketing writers or whatever use authoring tools, then the standardized microcontent needs to be there in their tool set as a reference. And if your translators use a computer-assisted translation tool with translation memory and so forth, your microcontent needs to be there as well as a reference. If you have people attempting to infuse your content with search keywords, well, you have to have those keywords predetermined and at their fingertips too. People often ask me if I can recommend a system for managing microcontent, and I expected this question to come up after the presentation. So let me be preemptive and just for a minute get to this question directly. Microcontent is often referred to in my circles as terminology. We've already used this term today. There are tools available for managing terminology, but most are embedded in other production tools, such as in a controlled computer-assisted translation tool or a controlled authoring software that I mentioned earlier. But by virtue of inheritance from their overarching system, these tools have certain limitations. To achieve optimum benefits and to be able to implement microcontent across the content management lifecycle, I highly recommend using a standalone system that was specifically and uniquely designed for managing microcontent. I've used many products for managing microcontent, and I'll be frank with you, my favorite is TermWeb that you see on the screen now. It's from a Swedish-based company called Interverbum Tech. It's a standalone system, which is actually very rare among the competition, as I just mentioned. So there's not a lot of choice out there for standalone systems, and this one is one. It meets international standards, such as the ISO standards I referred to earlier, and it has all the functions for sophisticated microcontent management. I'm not saying there are not other tools out there, and this isn't a sales pitch, but I figured the question would come up, and this is just my personal favorite. Okay, now here's a pared down screenshot of TermWeb. It could be another tool. You could get the same, I guess, the same stuff. But anyways, this is a pared down screenshot showing some information that you might want to share across your organization about a term. And here I'm taking up again the example of hybrid cloud. There's a definition, there's a picture, and a standardized term in 5 languages. So a lot of additional information could be recorded. This is just very basic. And it can be shared on desktops, in applications that your production staff are using, on mobile devices, and so forth. There are also some sophisticated management features such as like workflows to support content standardization, because there's a whole workflow and process around evaluating and standardizing microcontent. Well, this is pretty much my last slide, and I want to thank you for your attention. I hope I've convinced you about the benefits of a bottom-up approach to content management, and that you'll now have a new appreciation for microcontent. And please feel free to contact me if you have any questions or if you're further interested in exploring how to manage your microcontent. So I'll hand the microphone back to you, Adam.
Well, thank you, Kara. A very informative webinar. We have several questions that have been submitted. The first being, you mentioned that systems for managing micro-content that are embedded in other tools, such as a computer-assisted translation tool, have certain limitations. Could you elaborate on that point?
Yeah, okay, so let's take a controlled authoring software. I don't know if any of you on the call use them. They're becoming increasingly popular. There's a few that are very good. And they often have a function for managing terminology or micro-content within the controlled authoring software. And they're very appropriate and adequate for pushing standardized content to the authors, to the tech writers, you know, like as a kind of a term checker or word checker, similar to a spell checker. They're very good at that, and their functions for managing this micro-content are specifically tailored for that purpose. But if you want to manage, for example, search SEO keywords, if you want to manage translations within that system, you're going to encounter some difficulties with their data model. It's limited because it's designed to support authors in the authoring stage and not for anything else. If I talk about those functions that are embedded in computer-assisted translation tools, it's kind of the same situation, only the reverse. Those functions, call them dictionary functions or glossary functions, whatever you want to call them, they're really good for storing multilingual terms and equivalents in different languages. But when it comes to supporting the tech writers, the authors in your organization, they're not designed for that purpose, and so they don't have in their data model certain properties that are required for controlled authoring, like recommending preferred English terms over other terms. They might be able to capture that data, but they can't push that type of data into the controlled authoring system. They're not really well connected in that sense. And I myself personally am a strong advocate for managing microcontent for other purposes as well, not just for authoring or for translation, but as I mentioned, for search engine optimization, for indexing, for content classification within your organization, for developing lexical resources that can be applied for various different purposes. So I don't feel comfortable locking my content, my micro-content, in a translation tool or in an authoring tool, because then to use it for other purposes you have to extract it, you have to manipulate it, and you end up, you know, doing a lot of work. So those are the kinds of limitations. But if anybody on the call is interested in more, I'd be happy to talk more about that.
Great, thank you, Kara. The next question has come in is, have you seen micro-content concepts applied to e-learning?
Applied to e-learning? Wow, that's a good question. I'm not an e-learning expert. I really don't know anything more about that than the average person. But I could see using this micro-content for e-learning, like providing definitions and meanings of terms, like even simple things like acronyms. You know, I mean, that's an important element of micro-content management is acronyms, because they're ambiguous. The same acronym can have different full forms. So as kind of a knowledge base, which is how I envision managing micro-content anyways, not a flat list of terms with metadata, but an actual interconnected knowledge base, like a thesaurus kind of, only even better. I can see that as being an amazing e-learning tool, and I've thought about that before. I haven't actually implemented it for e-learning, but I think it's a great idea and would be willing to look into that.
Thank you, Kara. The next question has come in is, this is a little bit long, so please let me know if you need me to repeat anything, and here we go. For a small company, would you recommend having one gatekeeper person to make sure style sheets are being followed to be sure your micro-content is consistent, and staff are using the right keywords, terminology, instead of having to train new authors that join the group after others have left?
Oh, well, it's nice to have, it is good to have one gatekeeper, a person who's kind of overseeing the whole process. But a person can't supervise the use of micro-content by other people. For that we need to turn to technology. And education, of course, we can educate people. Here's, here's our database, you can access it on the web or whatever. But I'm a strong advocate of the push approach instead of the pull approach, where the information is sort of delivered to the authors, the translators, and the other producers of micro-content within their production, their working environment. So they don't really have to think about it. It's kind of like a spell checker. It should just pop up when they're writing or when they're translating. So, a person can't really do that. They can educate, they can provide access to the tools, they can support, but I think now we're in the world of technology now, and XML authoring, and we have the ability to do so much more now than we could even 10 years ago. And, this question mentioned the style guide. Well, those are things of the past. I mean today, those are relics of the past. You might still have one hanging around, but tools and technologies have replaced the style guide, and just like databases have replaced spreadsheets. So I would say if you have a style guide, great. You're a small company, maybe that's fine. You can work with that. But as your company grows, then you start to see that the guidelines in the style guide and in the handheld approach aren't always being implemented. You're going to have to look at other methods.
Great, thank you, Kara. The next question that's come in is, would you speak about the human process for negotiating meaning when defining a term?
Oh, the human process for negotiating meaning when defining a term. So let me think now. I think that means getting consensus on the meaning of a term among the stakeholders. So yeah, defining a term itself, that's an art and a science. Okay, there's a whole ISO standard around creating definitions. Okay, a whole different set of guidelines that I haven't even touched upon in this presentation. So that would have to be learnt first, how to write a proper definition. But it's not just writing, it's the collecting of the meaning, the elements of meaning behind the concept, and that sometimes needs, or often needs, the collaboration of subject matter experts and other stakeholders in your organization. So yeah, consensus building. One person can do the research and produce a draft definition and then involve other SMEs to subject matter experts, not small and medium enterprise. There's the acronym. Involve other people to make sure that the definition accurately reflects the meaning behind the term.
Thank you, Kara. The next question that's come in is how you use the word terminology for micro-content, but isn't terminology referring to scientific and technical terms? How does managing terminology apply to a company that doesn't produce scientific or technical content?
Okay, that's a great question. Well, this is where the word terminology isn't very good in today's world, because it's true that 20, 30 years ago, the word terminology and, the sort of academic and activities around managing terminology really said or adhered to the notion that a term is something with a scientific or technical meaning, like medical terminology or legal terminology or engineering terminology. And this is still true because actually the word terminology now is polysemic. It has more than that meaning nowadays. In commercial terminology management, we've moved beyond just managing these technical and scientific terms to managing micro-content, which goes beyond those scientific and technical concepts and can include all kinds of different meaningful concepts in the organization, such as those marketing slogans, smart engineering or smart manufacturing, that was one example, or even just gourmet coffee. These are not really scientific or technical terms, but yet they're very important within a company and they need to be managed accordingly. So I would say any company, any organization has micro-content, and this micro-content needs to be managed. And we can, for this purpose, draw inspiration from the principles historically applied to managing terminology, the methods and principles. But terminology today, managing terminology has has gone beyond that traditional notion and applies to all kinds of micro-content.
Thank you, Kara. The last question that's come in today is, on one of your slides show the section from a dictionary. How does managing micro-content differ from just creating and sharing a basic glossary?
Okay. Yeah, that's a really good question. Maybe I can even zoom in there, probably not. That's not it. Anyways, let's go up. So I'll show that screen capture just because we do have the time. There we go. Gamification, which this is just like a shot from a dictionary. Yeah, I want to emphasize that managing microcontent is not creating dictionaries like you see here. It involves elements of the same thing. Okay, we do write definitions, we do create entries for these pieces of microcontent, but we do a lot of more than that. We include a lot more metadata than you would see in an ordinary dictionary. But most importantly, managing microcontent adopts a different approach than a dictionary. A dictionary is structured according to what we call the lexicographic approach or word-based approach. It has a word like you see here, gamification, and then below it, it will put the definition, and if gamification had more than one meaning, if it was polysemic, it would have the definitions numbered and so on. That's the strict sort of word-based approach to managing this kind of content, okay? But a more robust, a more multi-purpose micro-content management strategy would be adopting what I call the concept-oriented approach. I mean, throughout my presentation, I've emphasized over and over again that micro-content is concept-based. It's univocal, it's referring to concepts, okay? So that's what we're actually managing, not the words that are adorning these concepts. So the word gamification, for example here, might have one or two other words in English. Maybe this isn't a good example, but there might be synonyms. Another word like, you know, play game station or something. And there might be, you know, 2 or 3 words in French for the same thing. So we end up with a cloud of words that refer to the same concept. And that's what we have to manage as a unit. Not the word gamification, but the concept behind it and all the different words in all the different languages that can be used to express that concept. And this is a concept-based approach, and it's very, very different from a dictionary or from a glossary.
Great. Well, thank you, Kara, and thank you everyone for attending today's webinar. This will conclude today's broadcast. You'll be able to access the recorded version of this webinar in our webinar archive section of our website located at www.dclab.com. Again, everyone, thank you for attending and have a great day.